Hi, everyone. I would now like to invite Karen Campbell, a from Canadian Women's Foundation, Joanna Harper from Catalyst, Raine Liliefeldt from YWCA, and Sadal Diab from Plan International Canada to deliver an exclusive workshop, Rebuild, Rehire, Reset. How can nonprofit and business leaders work together to support women through the economic recovery and beyond? This knowledge exchange will provide an opportunity to share best practices, resources, and tools across sectors. Learn how four prominent nonprofit organizations with expertise in preparing women and girls for the workforce are cooperating with business leaders to take action to advance gender equity in workplaces. Takeaway checklists and links to free and affordable resources to build back better and increase the resilience of your business.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone. So happy to have you join us. Welcome to Rebuild, Rehire, Reset. How can nonprofit and business leaders work together to support women through the economic recovery and beyond? My name is Raine Liliefeldt. My pronouns are she and her. I work with YWCA Canada as the Director of Member Services and Development. I'm a settler and really proud to work on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, which is home now to many First Nations. So I'm in Tuckeronto, based in Tuckeronto, usually known as Toronto. And the city also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, and Treaty 13 was signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We do land acknowledgement to honor the First People, and we're acknowledging the enduring experience of Indigenous people in this area for time immemorial. And in doing so, we must also recognize the harm that settler colonialism has perpetrated and continues to perpetrate on First Nations and Métis people. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we go.
It's time to have a conversation about gender inequality in the workplace. There are plenty of studies that prove that equity and diversity in the workplace enhances the quality of work and improves the bottom line. If we're serious about uprooting gender inequality, we have to go beyond surface tweaks and good intentions. We have to challenge and reshape workplace policies, practices, and cultures. Here are just some of the essential and connected steps you can take to move toward gender equality in your workplace. Create the right conditions, root out bias, build equitable leadership, end the gender pay gap. Achieving gender equality is a process, and workplaces have an important role to play. Visit igcompany.ca to learn about more steps you can take to build a better, stronger workplace and play a meaningful role in building human rights, dignity, and equality in Canada.
So just a little bit about what we're all about, folks. What I'll share is that many years ago now, about 4 years ago, YWCA Canada, Plan International, Catalyst, and the Canadian Women's Foundation were brought together by RBC with an intent to really look at what can we do bigger. So RBC brought these four organizations into a room to ask, what can we do that is beyond what we're doing right now that would essentially move the dial forward on removing barriers for women to labor market access, to training and leadership in the workplace. These organizations we were already doing exactly that, helping women and girls build leadership skills, build employment readiness, but there was an opportunity for us to do more. So that what we were hearing consistently in the community is that our service users were experiencing challenges accessing jobs, or once they were in particular workplaces that they had a horrible experience in terms of harassment or not being able to move forward in that work area. So our goal really within Good Company is to be this collaborative. We're a collaborative of these 4 national organizations that are focused on advancing the rights for women and girls. And we're funded by RBC. And so over the course of the next little while, my colleagues are going to share a little bit more about the project, our work, and how you can get involved as well. So thank you very much again for your patience. I'm going to try and share my screen again and then throw it over to my colleague, Sidel. Oh, sorry, to Karen. Over to you, Karen.
All right. So as Raine said, In Good Company is this collaborative of 4 national and international organizations that are working in Canada on advancing rights for women and girls. And our vision is a world where diverse women and gender diverse people can lead in any field, have a great positive experience in their workplace, free of harassment, and to be supported in their livelihood goals and career aspirations. It doesn't seem like that should be a lofty goal, but it's something that we've been working hard to move the dial on independently in our own organizations. But we thought, let's come together and try to affect some change in a collaborative way. Raine, if you could move 2 slides down, I'd like to tell folks about the research that we did to ground the work that we're doing together.
Sorry, 2 slides down?
Yeah, 2 slides down would be great.
Here we go.
So in the spring of this year, we commissioned some research to help us to have a bit of an evidence base for the direction that we were going together. Raine, I'm not sure if anybody can see that the slides have moved. So
I think we're just seeing your back end, not the presentation piece.
Yeah.
That's better. Okay.
No one needs to see my back end. All right,
there we go. All right.
There.
So to do this research, we had 2 pieces. We had a literature review and we had a series of key informant interviews. And I'm going to tell you very high level what we found. So we know as 4 organizations working with women that after decades of doing this work, the barriers to hiring and advancement within workplaces hasn't changed that much. Women are still facing harassment, discrimination, barriers to advancement. There's still a gender pay gap. Everything that you would have heard or alluded to already in the video that we just shared. So we wanted to come together to make some meaningful change. And in our review of the literature, what we found is that, of course, we've heard in the media as well how the pandemic has pushed women's participation in the labor force down to its lowest level in 3 decades. Speaking from the Canadian Women's Foundation perspective, our organization is 30 years old. And so what we're seeing is a throwback to where we started when our organization was founded. So we saw 1.5 million women losing their jobs in the first 2 months of the recession. We know from research that we have to center the identities and experiences of diverse women and gender diverse people to build back Canada's economy. And we also know that small and medium-sized enterprises like yours are really, really important to the Canadian economy and are really need to be the focus of economic recovery and growth. So you have a set of workers, women and gender diverse people who need to be supported in the recovery, and you have small and medium-sized enterprises that need to be supported in the recovery. Just over 98% of all businesses in Canada have fewer than 100 employees. That's a huge number of businesses. And small businesses alone employed almost 70% of private sector workers in 2018. So we know you folks have been hard hit, and the people that we work with have been hard hit. So how do we talk about this in a holistic way together about how we can move forward and support each other? The next slide down, please, Raine. After we did the literature review, we had our researchers go out and interview 29 business leaders, people who own small and medium-sized enterprises, and other leaders in various sectors that we were looking at. And we learned a few really important things. We learned that small and medium-sized enterprises don't always see themselves as part of the what's called the DEI conversation, diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, despite the well-documented benefits of diverse workforces. So often when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're thinking about like huge corporations with big HR departments who are putting in strategies to diversify their workforces. Small businesses don't necessarily have those mechanisms, and that's not necessarily part of what they're thinking about on the day-to-day. We talked to those business owners and we said, okay, you don't see yourself as part of this conversation. Why not? Like, what would you need to be able to participate? And what they told us is that it takes financial resources and time that they don't have. So reviewing policies or even putting policies and practices in place, examining what is the makeup of their workforce. That's research that they would need to do that kind of analysis. It takes time and money that frankly just isn't there for them. A lack of formal structures. So here I'm talking about human resources departments as a good example. Many small businesses don't have their own human resources department. And we learned a lot about how the workplace culture of small businesses can often be like an extension of the personality of the business owner. So if you have a business that's owned by a white male, they might have a really, particular and narrow lens on what might be needed within the workforce. And so just not having those structures in place to even know where to enter the conversation is an issue. A lack of knowledge and guidance was also cited. How do we do this? Where do we start? Who can we talk to about this? These are all the kinds of questions that were coming out. And a lack of data to understand the gap. So research on diversity, equity, and inclusion in small businesses is really thin. Most of the data that's out there, including Stats Canada data, is about big corporations, not about businesses with fewer than 500 employees. So we don't even necessarily have a very clear picture of what's happening in small and medium-sized enterprises. Who's hiring and retaining diverse workers? What's working and why? What are the best practices? We don't have that big of a data pool to draw from. So knowing what we know from our research, that SMEs were the hardest hit, that women and gender diverse people were the hardest hit, that DEI helps companies thrive, but that there's barriers to making that happen, we came together and we collaborated on what we call a theory of change that our 4 organizations could work on together to bring our expertise and the resources that we have to small and medium-sized enterprises to be able to engage in a really good discussion. So my colleague from Plan International Canada, Sadal, is going to talk to you about what emerged from that process.
Thank you, Karen, for that very informative presentation. I think you gave a lot of context that will allow me to elaborate on this next stage of our presentation. So thank you very much for being here. My name is Sadal Diab. I'm an advisor for PR and corporate communications at Plan International Canada, and I'll be talking to you about our theory of change. Next slide, please. So I think it's important for context purposes to first of all lay the groundwork in terms of our vision as In Good Company. Now, our vision is to positively impact the field of DE&I in Canada with small to medium enterprises in sectors where diverse women have traditionally been excluded. Now, all in all, we hope to contribute to a world where diverse women and gender diverse people can lead in any field, free of harassment and limitations, and be supported in their livelihood goals and career aspirations. Now, this slide illustrates our theory of change in the sense of the mechanism that we wish to execute to reach that goal. Now, one of the reasons why we have our theory of change is that it's clear that something needs to change. As As Karen mentioned, the pandemic has disproportionately affected women, people of color, and gender diverse people. But despite the challenges, there's also an opportunity that when we envision a post-COVID world through the integration of these communities, we can really contribute to a significant boost in the Canadian economy. Now, at the center of our theory of change lies our community of practice for SME peer learning. Now, as I move on and talk about the other contributing factors of our theory of change, I'll start off by mentioning research and data collection. Now, collectively as organizations, we've done a significant amount of research in these areas. And it's important to note that these are areas where there really is a gap in intersectional research and data on women and gender diverse people's participation in SMEs, particularly in areas of leadership. We think it's very important to really invest in this component because the more research and data that we have, the more all the actions that we undertake are based on solid facts and well-researched data. Now, if I move on to the next component, which is consulting and convening, we've been privileged in terms of the amount of organizations that we have really witnessed that are doing great work in the fields of diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, we've noticed that they're not necessarily aware of the different kinds of actions that are going on among other organizations, or also that they're coordinated. So in order to reach maximum impact, we do intend on facilitating this convening process, not only to facilitate their work with each other, but also to help us and to advise us in terms of best practices. Knowledge transfer. Now, we anticipate that we will learn a lot from this process, but we do not really intend on sitting on this information, but rather we would like to disseminate it to the max. Now, we have a website that has a lot of information, and we also intend on promoting and amplifying through our social media channels. Finally, we have media and comms. Now, we intend on really amplifying the work of organizations that are engaged in DE&I in order for people to know of the good work that's being done, but also to shift perceptions and for SMEs to really see themselves reflected in the area of DE&I and to be recognized as players in that area. Next slide, please. So how will our interventions work? Like what will this theory of change lead up to, and what really will be the impact and the final goals that we aspire to achieve? In the short term, we hope that SME leaders, sector leaders, and IGC partners will increase their knowledge, awareness, capacities, and resources to address the challenges that diverse women and gender diverse people face in leadership in SMEs. In the medium term, we anticipate that SME leaders will commit to and put in place high-impact D&I initiatives within their companies and share learning with other leaders in the industry. And the intended impact of all of these actions is increased participation and leadership of women and gender diverse people in SMEs through effective DE&I initiatives. That concludes my component of the presentation, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Sidal and Karen and Raine for the presentation today. And now we really wanted to shift the focus on to the audience. So we're hoping that you're here and ready to participate through the chat box, because we'd love to learn a little bit more about you. My name is Joanna Harper, and I am a director on the corporate engagement team at Catalyst. And as I mentioned, we're interested in learning a little bit more about what you're doing currently in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if that is nothing, that is completely fine. That is why we're here today, to talk about this. And so if you are able to share in the chat box, we'd love to hear your responses. So on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being non-existent and 1 being non-existent and 10 being fully embedded in everything you do. It is part of the heartbeat of your organization. How would you describe your current diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at your business? I'm going to give you a little bit of time to respond in the chat box there. And just while you do that, oftentimes we hear people ask kind of about making the case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or building that business case we hear so often about. And while we shouldn't have to, because it is the right thing to do, there is complete research from around the world that shows just how big an impact including diversity, equity, and inclusion practices in your organization makes a difference. So we do see that over and over, like I said, around the world, they found that DEI benefits both the individual, organizations, teams, as well as society as a whole. And it's been demonstrated that when done well, diversity and inclusion in the workplace can lead to increased revenue, reduced cost, greater innovation, as well as increased employee engagement, productivity, and commitment, which are all fantastic things that I think every organization wants to strive for. And notably, for companies that are most effective, for companies to be most effective in serving their customers, it's important that they look like their customer base as well. So knowing that there's the importance of this work, what do you feel may be holding you back from focusing on the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at your business? And Karen shared 4 of the examples that our research showed earlier, which was the lack of financial resources and time, lack of formal structure, lack of knowledge and guidance, or kind of unsure where to start, and then the lack of data. So I'm sure some of those or all of those might resonate with you, but we're curious to hear if there's anything else that might be kind of popping up when you want to make the efforts, you want to have the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. You see the benefits that it can bring to your organization, but there's something that's just preventing you from taking that step forward. We'd love to hear what that is, to help kind of break down that barrier and move you through into, fully incorporating this in what we do or what you do. Because these barriers, they can feel daunting. Like it's not an easy task sometimes to change a culture at an organization, but taking one step forward at the time can really help organizations overcome the barriers and see the rewards of a diverse and inclusive workplace. So another question out to you. What do you think that you can do differently today or tomorrow to help create an equitable and inclusive workplace for your colleagues? And it could be something small. At Catalyst, we have an infographic that says, be inclusive every day. And on it, there's like 30 different examples. And there is something as small as, getting to know your colleague a little bit better on a different level, taking a moment in a meeting to pause to ensure everyone has the opportunity to share. Things like that. They can be very small and they can, go all the way up to full company initiatives and changing. But every little step forwards really, truly does make a difference in how your employees experience their time out in the workplace, but also how your company will achieve in its business goals. So as a group, we did put together 5 suggestions to help kind of get you started on this path. So the first one is connect with empathy. Empathy is an important business skill that everyone can learn and better develop. It helps to bond colleagues. It sets the foundation for a really integrated and inclusive workplace. It's linked to many positive outcomes that teams can leverage to become more agile and innovative in times in crisis, as well as beyond. And as individuals, we can be intentional in our actions and remember that each of us, we're coming to this workplace and we experience the world very differently. And so when we make an effort to recognize and appreciate others' views, and setting the foundation for it really does set a foundation for a more integrated workplace. The second one is offer flexible and remote work options. So look to build remote first culture and develop inclusive hybrid workplace options. Obviously, there is some restrictions with regard to if you're in retail, like you need people physically in stores and things like that. However, when we're talking about inclusive workplace flexibility, it's not all or nothing. There can be many variations to how you expand access to schedule as well as location flexibility, and it can really work for your company. The third one is address the gender pay gap. So when hiring or rehiring employees, leaders have to look and ensure that women are being paid equitably and not penalized for pandemic-related layoffs. Truly equitable and inclusive work organizations work really hard to close this gender pay gap, as well as the opportunity and leadership gaps that exist within companies. The fourth is revisit your hiring practices. So look to ensure that you're not inadvertently excluding individuals. You can check for bias that might be hidden in processes such as, when you screen for resumes, when you're during the interview process, as well as when you're extending the offers. You can also audit your website, your social channels, your marketing materials. Look at the images that you're using on it. Look at how you're presenting yourself to the world. And that really can widen your pool and create a culture of diversity in all stages of hiring. And then the last one is listen to your employees. So it's to understand the changes that they want to see and address those changes head on, you have to listen to them. So it's clear that for a full economic recovery really depends on addressing these workplace inequities and impacts that diverse women and gender diverse people experience in the workplace. So those are just 5 suggestions. We do have many more on our website that are available for you to access, but we thought that these 5 are ones that you can take, especially number 1, and be more empathetic is something that we can all do better and we can all do focus on going forward. So I know we're nearing the end of our time, and we wanted to just ensure that if there's any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. If we don't have time now, we can follow up with you after the fact as well.
Thank you so much, ladies. I'm glad we had the chance to speak about this crucial topic of, diversity and inclusion, because there's still so much to learn. But thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules and being so insightful. I think our audience would be pleased by hearing from you.
Thank you.